in a fully autonomous vehicle, and we'll look at the different levels of autonomicity, a human passenger is not required to take control of the vehicle at any time. So this human passenger, so the concept of a human driver goes away. The driver is just another passenger in the car, and this passenger can be doing anything: reading books, gossiping with each other, sleeping, doing anything, right? And what we have is then what how can such an ecosystem be built up? How can such a decision making can come up, right? And that's where the next challenges lie. So we are now talking about the levels of automation, and the levels of automation are put by the SAE, Society of Automotive Engineers, into 6 different levels, or we can say 5 different levels, if we don't count the zero. The zero is saying that there is no automation at all. And all the tasks are given to the human driver. There may be some safety systems, but they are not sensing or controlling systems. So the control input is still given by the driver. So acceleration, deceleration, and steering are controlled by the human driver. The monitoring of the driving environment. We have means the mirror is there, mirror is provided, but who's looking at the mirror and taking a decision is the human driver. If the human driver does not look in the mirror and backs out the vehicle, the mirror is not going to stop the driver from doing so, right? Uh, so a reverse camera could potentially do that. Now, if something goes wrong, who owns the plan B? The human driver is the plan B. And is there any system level capability to automate? And that is not there. So there is zero automation. Then we go to partial or driver assistance, wherein we are taking, under certain situations, we are taking the decision making or the sensing away from the driver and putting it into a control box. A very good example of driver assistance is cruise control. So it can be operated only under certain conditions when the speed is high and the driver is running on a highway, engages the cruise control, and now the driver does not need to put the leg on the throttle pedal continuously. However, the driver still has to maintain eye on the road. The driver still has to hold the steering wheels, and that is the thing there, right? There are other elements like partial automation. Now, partial automation is one step more, wherein now the steering or the acceleration or deceleration will be done by system in all the modes, not just some mode, in all the modes. And however, the human is still the decision maker and driving the action. The fallback, anything goes wrong, the human driver has to step in. And under certain driving modes, there is full control available to the system, right? So here, every time we are still human driver centric. And when we go to the automation level 3, we lose control. We are handing over the control to the system, right? And that is conditional automation, wherein some specific driving modes, like a autopilot in the aircraft, can be used for certain specific modes of operation. Here we have some specific modes of driving. The complete dynamics can be taken care of by the system. And in maximum cases, the system will be able to take control and do the needful. However, maybe this system does not work on the streets of the city. It only works on the highway. So as soon as you enter the streets of the city, the human driver may have to take over, right? And that is where certain driving modes, the system is fully functional and takes care by that itself, but it will rely on the human driver to take control under certain circumstances. So today, the auto driving algorithms that are there in automotive applications are at level 3 of autonomicity, right? There are companies that are claiming that they are here and here, but it depends on how we view it. There is some gray areas on what really a level 3 versus a level 4 mean. In level 4, what we are saying, even the fallback is done by the system. So in some driving conditions, so what we are avoiding is bad weather. If bad weather is there, then the system will not be able to take care, right? So only certain environmental conditions, if there is ice on the road, the system may not be able to take care. So only some specific environmental conditions, the system will not be able to take over. Otherwise, it will take over for everything. And then full automation is where all driving modes, all situations, the system is going to take care of all the elements of the vehicle, right? So let us say a robo in a warehouse. A robo in a warehouse is typically working at level 4 or level 5. However, in some cases, the brain may not be at the robo itself. The brains of the robo may be sitting at some central computer, right? So those kind of applications are also there. The system may not be local alone. It may also be a server-based system, right? So these are the 5 levels of automation. The on-road world is trying to already done level 3, is trying to breach into level 4 and level 5. When we talk about robos or AGVs or AMRs, they are already in the level 5 of automation, but they are in a controlled environment. They are not going to see some of the weather conditions that the vehicle is going to see. Right, so this is a very standardized way of looking at the automation levels. We'll quickly go through a video. Just give me 1 second to set this up.
Okay. Just restarting.
You're now under automatic control. Hands off steering.
Okay, so there are a lot of components that are required to bring to a level 4 or a level 5 type of automation. And as we talk about these, we have to look at what are the sensors or what is the overall ecosystem that we will be requiring. Now, if we talk about camera by itself, camera and vision processing, we are talking about gigabytes of data uh, every second that can be generated by this system. Similarly, with the LiDAR sensor, it can easily generate gigabytes of data every minute. And then we need a lot of processing power for taking care of this much amount of data. And with that, one of the things that we realize that Traditionally, what we are being using a microcontroller in the heart of the automotive controller. This microcontroller is incapable of handling this huge amount of data, let alone doing anything with it. It cannot even handle it. And that is where it has to move from a microcontroller to something which can fast process of very complex 3D data. And that is where this has moved from the microcontroller to graphical processing unit or GPUs, right? So this GPUs are basically carrying out the processing function and then giving the higher level decisions to the vehicle controller, which is still a traditional automotive controller, right? So this piece is still traditional. These are the new elements getting added into the system. Now, with regards to the overall architecture, there are two elements that an autonomous vehicle needs to be good at. First, it needs to perceive the environment. And secondly, it needs to localize itself on a map. So perceive the environment, see the environment, just like our eyes do. But maybe it can do in a much better way. It can look at 360 degrees, whereas our eyes cannot look at 360 degrees, right? Localize, again, we go by maps, we go by street signs. It can do a much better job at localizing also to a very minute degree exactly where is it, exactness of the location where it is on the map. And those become two leading elements. Now it needs to perceive so that it does not hit, the car should not hit anyone. The car should follow all the traffic signals. And for that, it needs to look at what is around it and look at the road signs and deduce the road signs and the traffic signals. And all that work is happening here in these areas, right? It needs to see if a pedestrian is coming. All those elements are happening with these multiple types of sensors. And all sensors are giving some sort of data, as we'll see. So the perceive elements are here, and the localize elements. You get some level of data from the GPS saying where you are. So the GNSS system, system is going to give you some data. However, that's not enough. There may be times where you have no signal. GPS signal is not there, and we experience such things every day. So the GPS signal is not there, then what it can do? And that's where it needs to use some onboard sensors like gyroscopes, accelerometers, magnetometers, which are going to give it displacement and rate of displacement across the various axes. And that can be merged with the data it had from the GPS to give it an exact location, right? And that's the key element, how to get to a exact location. So before we get into talking about fully autonomous, let us scale back to some of the ADAS feature or advanced driver assistance features that are there. And for this, we need to look at some very basic features. And one of the basic feature is adaptive cruise control. And in adaptive cruise control, what is happening is if there are two vehicles A and B, B is going to try to follow behind A by a fixed distance. So D is just trying to control keeping this as constant, right? That's the key control algorithm working at B. So if A slows down, B will also slow down. If A starts accelerating, B will also start accelerating. And this definitely reduces the effort, the mental effort of the driver of the vehicle B, because he has enabled the adaptive cruise control and just trying to lay back, and the vehicle is moving by itself, right? Now in this case, one thing that is there is that there has to be some handshake between A and B. So we can also have adaptive cruise controls without A knowing that B is running an adaptive algorithm and following it. So that can also be undertaken. Right? So here the braking is happening automatically, and the acceleration and deceleration is happening automatically. The steering is not covered by adaptive cruise control. So this works well on the highway, on a long open road without having any turns. This will work perfectly. Right up front, a sensor can be used, which can be a radar. Most of them use a radar sensor, and try to keep the distance fixed between this vehicle and the vehicle in front. Now there are other features as well which are of benefit to the driver, reducing the pain points of the driver. One such feature is the lane departure warning system. And in the lane departure, the cameras are positioned in such a way that they are continuously monitoring the lanes. And if the vehicle starts deviating the path and crosses over the lane, then it can alert the driver by means of audio or visual alerts. Now, if the driver has already indicated that they are trying to get into the neighboring lane, then it will not do the alert, right? So this is more of still a level 2 feature. It is still giving everything in the hands of the driver itself. Then forward collision warning system. Again, it is kind of goes hand in hand with the adaptive cruise. Same type of sensors are going to be used. It is going to ensure that we always have a minimum gap with the car in front. And in case we don't, it will again give some sort of signal to the driver. Now we can make it intrusive that if the driver is not attending to it, then what is going to happen is that the system may do it by itself. So auto brake directly, right? So they wanted the driver to respond. The driver did not respond. It waited for 1 second. If the driver still did not respond, then the brake was depressed by the system itself. So the system is taking intrusion in this feature, right? So that's a different element here with the forward collision warning system. Then traffic sign recognition system. Again, very a key enabler for the autonomous vehicle, and also a good assistance feature to the driver, wherein the cameras are going to look at the road signs, and especially on night time where they may be very difficult to spot. the camera can spot them and accordingly give the driver the right information on the infotainment system, right? So this is another feature that a lot of passenger cars now are starting to have. Now, night vision is another key example of where the safety of the pedestrians can be protected. A lot of accidents happen in the night. So night vision and pedestrian detection with a thermal camera or infrared camera that can be undertaken as well. Now, infrared cameras, they will capture the thermal radiation from the vehicle or the pedestrian and give a very good outline feeling of the fact that there is someone, a human being or a cow or some animal on the on the road. A feature that all of us would love to have on our vehicles is the parking assistance. And parking assistance is a key element wherein a lot of scratches on the vehicle can be protected, right? And they use very small ultrasonic sensors which are positioned all around the critical curves of the vehicle so that you can get a better idea of the distance between the vehicle and the other vehicles which are already parked. And again, in most cases, if there is an issue, then a buzzer is sounded off, and then the driver can take appropriate action and try to see how do they want to park. In a lot of cases, such kind of systems are also getting now factory installed by the OEM itself on a four-wheeler. Right, so obviously we need two things. One is sensing, then making some decisions on that sensing, and then implementing those decisions. Now, if we were to be using a IC engine, we would have depended on the ECU and the hydraulics. If we are using battery powered motor, then we can turn on the MOSFETs and the relay drives to make the vehicle move forward. So the acceleration can be controlled. And the steering control has to be done with a differential drive and a servo mounted mechanism. So here what we are essentially saying that in order to achieve autonomicity, we need a drive-by-wire system working on the vehicle. If the vehicle is not drive-by-wire capable, actuators running on electronics, then we cannot implement autonomicity on the vehicle, right? Now we talked about camera. There are other proximity sensors, obstacle sensors. There are radars, lidars, different type of imaging mechanisms. But then we have to take that data and we have to do some matching or run some algorithms on it. At the same time, we take the navigation system, the GPS, GNSS encoders, and using all of that data, we decide what path we can follow. So there is a path we want to follow, which is coming from our map. We want to go from point A to point B. And then we are getting all these data from the vehicle as to what is around it and where it is. And we have to modify the path according to all this information. And that has to be done by the processor. Right, so let's talk about the critical components of the overall package. One is the sensor, clearly. The sensor is connected to the network, the vehicle's network, or to the cloud, and it is giving real-time information. Real-time and actionable data. Like a camera image may show that there is a person in front, right? And the radar may show that the person is at a distance of 5 meters. So it's a actionable data that the vehicle has to come to a halt before 5 meters. And accordingly, that information is given to the controller. Now, what we have seen is most of the sensors have limited range, so they cannot look at infinite space ahead of them, and they have a bandwidth which is limited. And in order to get the best decisions, one sensor cannot give us the right data. So we need to use multiple sensors, right? And with that, we can definitely get to a level 5 autonomous driving experience. That is, the vehicle is aware of everything happening around it. At the same time, as we said, there is a lot of 3D data that is coming to the processor, and the processor has to significantly increase its speed compared to the traditional processors used in automotive. So we have sensors, we have processor, but then we need data or software which is going to make sense of all this data. And on this software, we need very complicated algorithms like machine learning and artificial intelligence to be put in to manage the different situations, right? So how to drive the vehicle in a traffic jam, how to drive the vehicle when it is raining, how to drive the vehicle when there is a thunderstorm, how to drive the vehicle when you are passing next to a school. All those things have to go onto this software, right? At the same time, the vehicle needs to know where it is, and for that, it needs to have some map storage. It needs to have some geographical information so that it can take all the data and determine its exact location and continue to work even if GPS coverage fails. So very critical point that we need to continue to work even if the GPS coverage fails. And in order to work, once all the decisions are made, then obviously we need the actuators to move the motor, actuate the motors. And this is a true element of the drive-by-wire system. Just that now here the components are more from the electrical domain, and it can also take care of the steering, of the acceleration, and of the braking. Right, so let us ensure that we have a good understanding of all the parameters which are mentioned here on this slide. First of all, we say that the physical aspect, the physical thing on which an autonomous application can be built has to be a drive-by-wire vehicle. It's a vehicle which is allowing us to run it via electronics. Now, as we run it, we have to make some decisions. And for applying those decisions, there has to be a computing unit. So there has to be a microprocessor on board. This microprocessor alone cannot do anything. It needs to take inputs from a lot of sensors. So ultrasonic is a perception sensor. GNSS is a localization sensor. IMU is a localization sensor. Camera is again a perception sensor. LIDAR is again a perception sensor. Radar is going to play a role potentially in both, but largely is a perception sensor. HMI is a output. HMI is the output or the user interface. So the user input is coming from the HMI interaction with the user. And then the black box is a data logger. And this black box may also actually be over the cloud. If we want to interface all these things, then we need a operating system that is working. And that operating system can be like a Linux platform, can be something like a embedded Windows running on it. It can have multiple elements in there. And on that, we have the high level algorithms, which are taking the inputs from these multiple sensors, coming up with the perception, a 360-degree view of what is around the vehicle, coming up with the localization, where exact the vehicle is, and it will use the map engine for getting that information. Then what controls need to be done once a decision is being taken, how to do it in an end-to-end closed loop fashion, and what are we going to display to the vehicle driver or vehicle owner at that point. And for doing this, we need to have much better sensor fusion, because this perception and localization, we have to merge the data received from multiple sensors, and that is what sensor fusion does. And from the output of the sensor fusion, we have to take some decisions based on the output, right? And those decisions have to be based on the sensors as well as the trajectory that we plan to follow. So if we are going from A to B and we are at a point C in between, then at C, what is the status? How are our sensors? What are our sensors saying? We have to perceive all that and then try to move towards B given the data from C. And above all of this, we have to have a safety layer so that there is no intrusion into our architecture, right? So overall, this is the autonomous vehicle architecture, and these are the core pieces that it will have. So here we can stop for some questions and also maybe a 5-minute break after the questions. So if anyone has questions, they can ask right now.
So Shekhar, this is Ramdas here.
Yes.
So can you throw some light on the functional safety aspects of this autonomous vehicle?
Right. So see, first of all, this functional safety has become a very buzzword, right? Let us let me twist it to you, Ramdas. What does functional safety mean to you?
Well, so it actually taking care of the eventualities and
Yeah,
having redundancy,
right.
and then
So,
the fail-safe implementing fail-safe mechanism, and all
right,
these things together. Yeah,
right.
and
So,
implementing reliability into the system.
exactly. So, let us take the problem at a higher level. What requirement we have from the vehicle is that the vehicle should not have any unintentional acceleration. Okay. So we don't want any unintentional acceleration. So now we have to come down and say, okay, what can cause unintentional acceleration?
And unintentional braking also.
Say again.
It's acceleration also braking. So you should not
Yes,
brake.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
So there are two problem statements. This is the first one, that there should not be any unintentional acceleration, right? So whatever in the architecture can lead to any sort of unintentional acceleration will come under the functional safety boundary, right? So let's say that we have this accelerator pedal, and the driver is requesting 30%, but due to some electrical error or a wiring error, we are seeing 70%. That means this can cause unintentional acceleration. And for that, we have to then have a redundancy in the system for this accelerator pedal. So then we go for a pedal which has two sensor outputs, and they cross connect with each other, right? So even if one of the thing fails, we'll come to know, and we will be able to catch if the accelerator pedal has failed. Now there is some A to D ADC converter, analog to digital converter, which is converting this 30% or 70%, whatever is the output of the accelerator pedal, into the input that is going for the microprocessor. And in this case, what we need is that this ADC also has to be checked. So then again, I need a redundant analog to digital converter that I will use every few times, so as to ensure that my primary converter is not making a mistake. Then I'm taking a decision in the microprocessor, and that also can go wrong. So I need a redundant microprocessor which is saying that this microprocessor is always doing the correct thing, right? It is checking the primary microprocessor continuously. So everything in the equation, even if the chance of it going wrong is 1 in million, we have to have a plan B or a check for it. And that is what is coming under the functional safety. From all the sides, we have to look at accelerator pedal is one of the simpler components. We have to look at the motor. We have to look at the motor controller. We have to look at the battery. Could a improper cell voltage reading cause unintentional acceleration, right? So we have to look at all these points. The second is intended braking should always happen. Unintended acceleration should never happen, and intended braking should always happen, right? So this is the second problem statement of functional safety. and then everything required for braking, all the decision making going into braking also has to be covered in the same way. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Break आएगा.
Hello, sir. This is Aditya.
Yes. Yes, Aditya.
Sir, you told that the sensors used right now are limited to short range.
Some of the sensors being used right now are limited to short range. As
But
we increase the range, accuracy is going down.
Okay, okay. But you told that multiple sensors are used right now. So why is
Right.
it that?
So we'll come to see every sensor has some positive point and some deficiencies. So we'll use a mixture of the sensors.
Okay, understood, sir. Thank you.
Excuse me, sir. My name is Vishnu.
Yes, Vishnu.
Yeah, you spoke about operating systems. Like, I would want to know which are the commonly used ones in the cars these days. Like,
Initially a lot of things started on Linux,
okay,
but it's coming from a very, very different IT world. And even though, you know, some places are using it right now, a new system that is fastly taking over this autonomous vehicle is called as ROS, Robo Operating System. Okay. So
okay,
ROS is becoming the key element wherein it allows some level of hybridization with the traditional operating systems. It is not really Linux per se, but it is dropping all the things which are not required for our type of application. It's throwing away all the baggage of the operating system apart from the elements required for autonomous navigation.
okay. So, I had one more doubt. How is usually Android Auto and Apple CarPlay integrated into the infotainment system?
Yes.
Like, how is that combined? Like,
yeah. So see, infotainment is a very, very low reliability system. Okay.
okay,
If it shows inaccuracies, if it gives the wrong results, it is not going to create a hazard situation in most cases.
okay.
Right.
True.
So that is where while those platforms can evolve, and that's what their companies are trying to do, right? But it is not very simple. It is not very simple. Here, the complexities that we are going to get into are going to be very, very complicated, right? And autonomous vehicles has seen a lot of companies come and go as well.
Correct.
Right? There was a time when the IT companies thought that they no longer need the automotive companies and they can do this by themselves.
True, correct.
And now they have gone and tied up with the automotive companies. So that's where the things are. It is not very simple.
True. Thank you, sir.
Okay, we'll take a very fast 2 minutes break and come back.
Shekhar, actually, we have 2 questions.
Okay, on the chat window. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, okay, Soma Shekhar, what is the max distance of the present sensor technology? Well, on a clear day, it can go up to even 200 meters on a straight road. but I would say a fair estimate would be around 30 meters for being very, very sure of what the object is. Then Pramod, if 3 autonomous cars are parking at the time close to each other, well, Pramod, if it all depends on how their algorithms are made, right? It's a good problem situation to have. Now, right now, people are parking autonomous cars within like a complex of the conventional cars, and soon they will have to get these problem statements also where there are 3 cars and parking at the same time and all of them are autonomous. These are problems to be solved. I don't think that it will be a issue-free scenario. Okay, Dhanashree, your question is what research is going on autonomous two-wheeler? Very little research is going on autonomous two-wheeler. Just because two-wheeler has some dependencies on the driver anyway, right? On the rider, because of the weight and the balancing elements. However, ADAS type of functions, advanced driver assistance functions, are already starting to come up in the two-wheelers, and soon they will become more and more common. Right now, all the Android and the infotainment and all that is going to already start. Okay. How accurate, Arun Kumar, how accurate the image processing algorithms is used in distance measurement with RGB cameras? See, accuracy and complexity of the computation, they go hand in hand. But if we have an additional camera, we have an additional sensor like a LiDAR, then we may be very, very accurate in processing the image as far as distance. Now, what it is completely dependent on the camera. AV to AV communication required as a protocol. It is coming up, Umesh. Connected vehicles protocol is coming up. AVs will have to follow the same connected vehicle protocol. It's not yet mandated across the board, but the algorithms and the standards are coming up very soon. Okay, response time for the sensors. Somashekar, we'll get into it as we move along. So we'll just start talking about the sensors as we speak. Okay, so let us continue.
Back in 2009, in our early days at Google, we started working on self-driving cars. Today, we're called Waymo, and our fully self-driving cars are on the road. They use a range of technology we've built from the ground up to understand the world around them and get you where you need to go. You're about to see how it all works and what it feels like to ride in our car. As it drives, Waymo uses LiDAR, which sends out millions of laser beams per second, to build up a detailed picture of the world all 360 degrees around it. It also uses radar to detect how far away objects are and their speed. And high-resolution cameras detect visual information, like whether a traffic signal is red or green. It then combines all that data to understand the world around it. For example, in this fraction of a second, it knows exactly where it is on the road. It can also identify everything around it in full 360 degrees, and then predict what those things might do next. And it doesn't just do that for the objects you and I can see. It can do that for things up to 3 football fields away. What makes everything you can see right now possible is experience. Waymo has already self-driven millions of miles on complicated city streets, and it's constantly learning from every single mile it drives. With all that knowledge, it can plan a safe path ahead. In this instance, giving that cyclist enough room to cycle past us, and also looking out for that pedestrian on the sidewalk. And when it comes to making decisions, this is a good example of how Waymo doesn't just take into account your safety. It also makes sure that both you and the people around you feel secure and at ease. So now that you know how Waymo works, it's time to take your first ride in one of our cars. Take a look around. You're now riding in a fully self-driving car. Some things might immediately stand out. The fact that there's no one in the driver's seat, no one turning the wheel, and the screens, which show you what the car is seeing and the route it's taking. But you might also notice that the ride feels a lot like being driven in a regular car. And that's the way it should feel. All this technology, which allows Waymo to see, identify, predict, and plan, should make an extraordinary ride feel completely ordinary and create a very normal journey that simply gets you from A to B, safe and sound. And while it does all that, all you have to do is sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride.
Okay, so as we see, one of the biggest challenges is that we need to know what is there around the vehicle. And there are 2-3 elements here. So one is looking up front, scanning the road ahead, in front, and finding out what is happening. And what we are looking at is traffic lights, traffic signs, pedestrian crossing, barriers. So this is forward looking that we have to be in order to follow the route. And the second is to look at what are others doing, what are the other things around the vehicle. And there are multiple sensors being used here. Now here we are seeing a vehicle, autonomous vehicle. So there is a LiDAR, which is working on the laser beams, radar, which is working on the radio waves. Then we have video cameras, maybe one or multiple. We have ultrasonic sensor, which is working on the ultrasonic bandwidth. And then we have a couple of sensors for the localization element, which is the inertial unit and the GPS. Right, so now let us look at these sensors independently. So we have the ultrasonic sensor. An ultrasonic sensor is, I would say, the cheapest ones amongst all the sensors related to autonomous vehicles. And it is sending ultrasonic waves in the range of 20 kilohertz to 58 kilohertz, generated by using a magnetoresistive membrane, and it can measure the distance of the object. There is a simple principle which is used on this and all the other cameras as well. It is based on the time of flight. So it is sending a wave out, and the wave is getting reflected from the surface, and a response is coming back. So this response, which is coming back, the echo, when the echo is received, if we divide the time of flight by 2, we know the distance, right? C is the velocity of the wave, and time of flight is the time taken. And this is continuously happening. It is sending out multiple waves and continuously getting this feedback and processing it, right? Now, ultrasonic sensors don't have a very long range, and they are usually used for the parking system or short distance measurement. So at low speed, right? So that's a drawback of ultrasonic sensors, but they are pretty helpful in some of the features that are related to parking or related to watching for any kid behind the vehicle when the vehicle is backing up. So all those things can be done with the ultrasonic sensor. The radar is doing the same thing. However, it's working at much higher frequencies, right? The principle is again based on the same methods, getting an echo back, and it can give direction and speed of the target. So it can find the distance, and it can also decipher the speed of the target, because it is going to get continuous repeated signals back. It can know how that target is moving compared to the vehicle itself. Here the radar system uses an array of antennas, which is capable of gathering a set of lobes, and we can get a main lobe and multiple smaller lobes, and that is going to be sent out in order to get the free echo back from the target. Right, and it can also work to detect multiple targets. So it is not chasing only one object at a given point of time. Radar is used in multiple elements, where I would say it is short and medium range type of sensor. There are long range radars as well, but let's say it's limited to the adaptive cruise control or the forward collision warning. So again, we are saying the critical element here is around the 30-meter mark, wherein it is going to do most of its functionalities. And multiple features: blind stop detection, lane change assistance. If cross traffic is coming from the rear, it can alert. Forward cross traffic alert, forward collision warning. It is going to mostly work on the safety, right? And reduce the decision-making burden of the driver. It is installed besides the bumper of the vehicle. So you may have seen the bumpers of vehicles with multiple small sensor holes in the back, and they are either the ultrasonic or the radar sensors typically. Right now, the LiDAR is getting into the light detection and ranging using the laser beams, and it sends out a pulsed light emitted from a laser diode. So again, this can travel much faster and go to much larger distances. So as we were saying, 3 football fields, it can do up to 500 meters and do very good detection if the road is very flat. Otherwise, it will have some challenges. But currently available designs do 300 meters very easily. This one is a next generation single photon LiDAR. It claims to do 500 meters. Look at multiple things. So it can sense the traffic light, it can sense the car, it can sense the person walking, crossing the street, also the trees in the surrounding. So that can be done. Right, and then there are varieties of LiDARs. There is a 2D version, 3D version. There is solid state LiDAR. The 2D is going to project a single laser beam on the rotating mirror perpendicular to the axis of rotation. So here the information coming back is flat. It is not coming on a curvature. And since it's flat, it cannot give the exact shape at times. And it will give a flat shape as well. So for certain objects, it may be a problem in the detection. A 3D LiDAR, the response comes on a curvature. And since it comes on a curvature, we can find the depth of the object as well. It's very similar to our eyes. So this is operating much closer to our own eyes. And what we can have is a motor so that we keep on rotating this and we can get a 360-degree view as well, right? So we can have like a 4 to 128 lasers or channels with horizontal field of view of 360 degrees. So that 360 degrees can be enabled by the motor, and then we can have multiple number of laser diode emitters on that. So 4 to 128 depends on how much accuracy we want, right? LiDARs remain very expensive components. And that is where there are a lot of ecosystems which are saying, let's just go with the camera, which is much cheaper versus doing a LiDAR. However, there is some school of thoughts who have made LiDAR as their central component of autonomous navigation, right? Now, there are challenges with the LiDAR as well. It is affected by weather conditions, rain, snow, fog, dusty environment, anything that can cause diffraction of light on the surface. That can also be a problem for it. So it has to be well maintained. There is also projects going on to develop auto clean mechanism or wipers for the LiDARs. Solid state LiDAR is more compact, and it works on a micro mirror or a MEMS circuit instead of having the laser diode emitters as a actual component. It has them embedded, and here the micro mirror, so there are multiple small mirrors that are used to cover the entire range. Again, there are very smart offerings already coming from suppliers, and the 360-degree view can be maintained as using a motor, right? So here, obviously, compared to a mechanical LiDAR, the solid state LiDAR does increase the durability. It reduces the maintenance task. There is a decrease in price as well, because the embedded component, the MEMS, can be made in larger volumes. So if we go to large volume, then the solid state LiDAR is much cheaper. Then, apart from these, we also need some actual data. So we have cameras where we have the visual or the color camera and the infrared camera. The color camera is going to have the wavelength between 400 nanometer to 780 nanometers, same as the human eye. And it can give much higher quality color information, high resolution, can be used for a lot of the components. However, we'll see that it doesn't do the distance as effectively as the other scenarios, radar and the LiDAR. So if we want short distance, radar is there. For larger distances, LiDAR is there. Infrared is there. It is a thermal camera. Basically, it is going to give a thermal trace, and it will works well when we are looking at detecting pedestrians, animals, other vehicles, anything that is going to give a thermal sign back. Very good for nighttime navigation, because this is very critical for nighttime. The camera may not be able to do that. And a lot of times when the vehicle is coming out from a shadow region or a dark tunnel into the outside, that is also a challenge. Right, so if we look at all these sensors and if we look at critical elements of them, like the field of view, the range, the accuracy, the color perception, all of them have different benefits compared to each other. So if we look at a radar, the radar is pretty much good, low price. The range is good. However, it is not good in size. It is not good in weather affections, maintenance, visibility. So it doesn't fit the complete benefit that is required. And here we see that it's a crossover. We kind of need all of it, and we need the benefits of most of these sensors. And that's where the comparison comes. And most of the autonomous applications, we'll see that we are using more than one offering and coming together with it. So if we look at jumbling them up, then we can get a complete scenario where we can meet our expected criteria, right? So that is how things are structured. There is no one sensor fits all. And that is why there are companies now that are coming with integrated units, integrated sensing units, which already have a combination of two or more of these sensors. Combine the two or more of these sensors. right? So we talked about perception. We went through the different sensors which are required to understand the surrounding. At the same time, the vehicle needs to know where it is, where on the map is it at a given point of time. And that is done by the position estimation systems. These are using data from multiple sensors and trying to find out the exact position of the vehicle at a given point. And one of the key sensors or key points that they are going to look at is the GNSS system, which is going to give the coordinates of multiple satellites to this vehicle. And the more the satellites it is able to get, it is going to go give much precious precise location, just like our cell phone. When we enable the GPS, we are connecting with these GPS satellite system, and we are going to get all the data which is going to give the XYZ and time. And once we have 4 visible satellites, we are able to get to a precise location of the vehicle. Right now, again, these GNSS systems, there are multiple different GPS antennas and GPS systems that are there. There is also a differential GNSS, which is already tied to a constellation of the satellites and is only working with a differential system. So it already knows the 4 satellites that it needs to connect with, and the base station is continuously taking this interaction with the satellites. Now, here, this is going to be a more costlier element, because it is going to continuously take this data from the central system. However, there are different elements that can be built into the algorithms as well. Now, as I said, there are different elements also that can be taken up. So there is signal correction from the satellite. We can do some correction on what is the position of the vehicle. And there are different correction mechanisms. One of them is the satellite-based augmentation system, SBAS. And it was originally designed for the aircraft industry, air navigation, to improve the horizontal and vertical scenarios. Just give me 1 second. Improve the horizontal and vertical localization. And then there is the real-time kinematics, which is looking at the rover type of application that we just saw. And certain stations are made as the rover station, and we get double the points from each of the stations within the range of 20 kilometers. So a lot of times you see that these features are getting used. And sometimes if you don't have proper GPS signal, it will show you the location of the tower. On your cell phone, it will show you where the closest tower is. And that is the type of correction it is doing. So in this case, in the lack of proper signals from other satellites, it is showing your location offset towards the satellite that is responding, or the tower that is responding. right? So the tower system is obviously, we have seen it used in the cell phone industry. Here we are going to see more of a direct use of the GNSS system when it comes to the autonomous vehicles. Now, there is a lot of time when we are going to not have GPS connection. We are not going to have the access to the satellites when we are in tunnel, when the vehicle is parked in the underground parking lot, or a multi-storied parking lot as well. It may not have the access to the satellites. And in this case, it needs to have a way to still know that it is traveling, and the location has to keep on changing. And this is done by using the other sensors that are there along with the odometry data. So the distance data that we are getting from the wheels, along with the internal measurement unit or inertial measurement unit, wherein we have accelerometers, gyroscopes, and magnetometers together, which can give what is the displacement in the X, Y, and Z axis, and what is the rate of displacement in those axes, so that the vehicle is always aware. It will keep on accumulating or integrating this data of differential X, Y, and Z, so that it can still travel on the map. And we see such algorithms on our cell phone as well. So sometimes when we lose the GPS, we are still able to see that we are tracking on the map as we are moving, right? So those kind of things are being used in the autonomous vehicle as well. Right now, one key element, as we saw, is that whether it be perception or localization, one sensor does not give us all the intelligence, and we cannot rely on a single source of the sensor. So we have to use two or more sources of data. Two or more sensors have to be there. And the data stream of these sensors is coming at different times, right? So the data stream is coming at different times, and the data stream is coming at different times at different frequency. And we need to combine these at a very fast speed. We need to combine them at the same time. We cannot afford a overlap which is not matching. So the time t is equal to 0 needs to be the same for both of them, right? And that becomes a challenge when one of the sensor is very fast and one of the sensor is a slow sensor. So we have to do these optimization. We have separate sensor data coming. It's large amount of data. So we need to be looking at the camera image at the same time overlaying our radar data on the top of that camera image, right? So that is a key challenge that we have, and we need to do that. We need to remove any redundant information, right? Or if there is uncertainty, let's say the camera is saying this is a person, and the radar is saying that this is walking at 30 kilometers per hour, moving at 30 kilometers per hour. So maybe it is not a person, right? Maybe it's a person who is standing and moving on a Segway, right? Yes, a person moving on a Segway could potentially be going that fast, but a person by themselves cannot be walking that fast. right? So we have to merge and then take a decision. And maybe that decision is already something that we have learned in the past, or we now need to learn it new, right? So we have to look at the redundant data. We have to remove the uncertainty in the measurement. This is uncertain because this is conflicting, person and 30 kilometers per hour. It conflicted, and that's why we realized that we don't know what this is, right? So we improve the accuracy, we improve the overall decision making, and that's the need of having multiple sensors and having these fusion algorithms. And there are variety of fusion algorithms that we'll see tomorrow. Different ways in which we can do the fusion, different ways in which we can take the decisions as well. And we are going to talk about it in detail tomorrow. We'll just give a slight overview today on how this kind of thing is work. So let's say we have multiple sensors and they are working on different environments, right? And let's say we are trying to look at how we fuse, right? So here you can see the fusion patterns. Sensor 1 and sensor 2 are adding their information. They are complementary with each other. Sensor 1 is giving some totally different parameters, and sensor 2 is giving different parameters. So a complementary fusion is where we are adding those things together to get a complete view, which is not given by any of the sensors independently. Now here's S2 and S3 are redundant sensors. So they may be, let's say, ultrasonic sensors trying to see if there is a vehicle next to us. And one of them is saying yes, one of them is saying no, or both of them are saying no. So they are redundant. They are looking at the same thing and giving the same output. So they are redundant sensors, and there is a redundant fusion. Based on that, we have to take a decision. Now, it could be that both of them are saying the same thing, so it is very easy. Or one is saying a 1 and second is saying a 0. And then it becomes like if the sensor is saying there is a car next to us, don't park here. And this sensor is saying there is no car next to us, then we would rather believe this sensor 2 in order to avoid any bad situation, right? So we'll believe the sensor 2 and we'll be more conservative. So whether we want to be conservative or whether we want to be aggressive, that has to be decided in our fusion algorithm, right? And then we have cooperative fusion, wherein both the sensors are taking the same information, but they are probably doing it at different speeds. So this is taking a sample once every 5 seconds. This is taking a sample once every 100 milliseconds. And every 5 seconds, S1 is helping correct S4, if at all S4 deviates. And that is where they are cooperating with each other. So there are different types of the fusions that we may have.